بدان که در صورت اقدام برای حمله به ایران هم سرزمین اشغالی و هم تمام مراکز و پایگاه‌های نظامی و کشتی‌های آمریکا در منطقه هدف مشروع ما خواهند بود و با این اعترافات صریحی.
This isn't normal geopolitics anymore. This isn't routine saber rattling. This is a volatile authoritarian regime abroad reacting to a volatile authoritarian impulse at home. And what just happened should make every American pause, because the consequences don't stay overseas. Here's the reality. Iran just issued one of its clearest warnings yet to the United States and Israel, not in vague diplomatic language, not in coded terms, a direct message. Any military strike on Iran, especially under the banner of restoring order, would trigger retaliation against U.S. bases, regional shipping routes, and Israel itself. That is not bluster for domestic consumption. That is deterrence language. And it didn't appear out of nowhere. Let me explain why this matters. This warning came in response to rhetoric coming out of Washington that has become dangerously familiar. Threats of intervention, threats framed as moral outrage, threats that collapse complex civil unrest into a simplistic narrative of force. And yes, this posture has Donald Trump's fingerprints all over it. The instinct to respond to instability not with restraint or diplomacy, but with dominance, with spectacle, with the language of punishment. Here's where it gets disturbing. Iran is currently facing the most serious internal challenge it has seen in years. Civil unrest poses the biggest threat to the Islamic Republic in years, and that's not hyperbole. Protests have spread across more than 100 cities. The catalyst was economic collapse, soaring prices, a currency in freefall, a population squeezed beyond endurance. But what we're seeing now is something deeper: sustained anger, organized defiance, a population testing the limits of repression. The government's response has been brutal. Arrests in the thousands, dozens dead, according to human rights groups, likely more, internet blackouts designed to erase evidence, public warnings that protest could be punished by execution. This is a regime under stress, tightening the screws because it fears losing control. And when authoritarian regimes feel cornered, they externalize threats. That's where the United States enters the picture. Iranian officials are explicitly framing these protests not as a domestic uprising, but as a foreign plot, an American-Israeli conspiracy, a coordinated attempt to destabilize the state. This is classic authoritarian playbook behavior. Blame the outsider, invent the enemy, use nationalism to crush dissent. But here's the dangerous twist. When American leaders echo that framing with threats of intervention, they validate it. Iran warns U.S. and Israel against intervention. That phrase isn't just a headline, it's a flashing red light. Because intervention rhetoric doesn't weaken hardliners in Tehran, it empowers them. It allows the regime to rebrand protesters as traitors and justify mass repression under the banner of national defense. Now let's talk about Trump, because this pattern is impossible to ignore. Donald Trump has always viewed global politics through a lens of dominance and humiliation. Allies are subordinate. Adversaries are to be crushed. Civil unrest is weakness. Protest is illegitimate unless it serves him. We've seen this instinct repeatedly, from his threats against North Korea to his reckless escalation with Iran during his presidency. And critically, we've seen how this worldview intersects with his response to protests at home. When Americans protested police violence, Trump didn't ask why. He demanded force. When governors hesitated, he called them weak. When protesters marched, he talked about dominating the streets. This is not coincidence, it's ideology. Authoritarian instinct applied domestically and internationally. So when Trump or figures aligned with him signal that unrest abroad might justify American military action, authoritarian regimes hear something very specific: permission. This is not an isolated moment. Iranian leadership is now openly describing the conflict with the United States and Israel as a multi-front war: economic, military, psychological, information warfare. That framing matters. It means that sanctions, rhetoric, cyber activity, and protest coverage are all being folded into a single hostile narrative. And in that context, threats of intervention don't deter escalation, they accelerate it. Let's talk consequences. If the United States were to strike Iran under these conditions, retaliation would not be symbolic. It would be strategic. U.S. bases across the region would become targets. Shipping lanes would be disrupted. Energy markets would spike. Israel would be pulled directly into a broader confrontation. And American forces would be placed in immediate danger, not because of necessity, but because of impulse. This is where the legal and democratic implications become unavoidable. Any unilateral military action under these circumstances would raise serious constitutional questions. War powers are not a personal tool. They do not belong to a president's ego or to a campaign narrative built on strength. They require justification, authorization, and clarity of purpose, none of which exist here. Moreover, intervention framed as a response to protest deaths creates a grotesque irony. The United States would be claiming moral authority abroad while grappling with its own democratic erosion at home, while a former president openly attacks the legitimacy of elections, while courts are forced to adjudicate whether a political leader incited an insurrection, while democratic norms are under sustained assault. That contradiction does not go unnoticed globally. Authoritarian regimes thrive on hypocrisy. They point to it, they exploit it, and they use it to discredit genuine human rights advocacy. This is why this moment matters. Iran's crackdown is real. The suffering of protesters is real. But so is the danger of reckless escalation driven by authoritarian instincts masquerading as strength. And make no mistake, Trump's style of politics feeds this danger. His rhetoric collapses nuance. His threats flatten complexity. His worldview divides the world into enemies to be crushed and supporters to be rewarded. That framework is incompatible with democratic leadership, especially in moments of global crisis. We are watching two forms of authoritarianism mirror each other, one abroad, one domestic, each using unrest to justify repression, each using external threats to consolidate power, each dismissing dissent as sabotage. And caught in the middle are civilians, protesters, soldiers, entire regions on edge. This is the climax we're approaching, because if this escalates further, it won't be gradual, it will be sudden. A strike, a retaliation, a miscalculation, and shockwaves through Washington, through the Middle East, through global markets, through already fragile democratic systems. This is not strength. It's a complete meltdown of responsible leadership. History is unforgiving with moments like this. It doesn't remember who sounded tough on television. It remembers who restrained force when it was easy to use, who understood that democracy survives not through domination, but through legitimacy. The warning signs are no longer subtle. They are loud, they are explicit, and they are telling us that authoritarian reflexes, whether in Tehran or Mar-a-Lago, carry real-world consequences. This moment matters because it exposes the cost of reckless rhetoric. It shows how easily domestic extremism can bleed into foreign policy disaster. And it reminds us that democracy doesn't just erode through coups or tanks. It erodes through applause for threats, indifference to law, and the normalization of power without accountability. Stay informed, stay sharp. And for real, unfiltered updates like this, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay connected.